everybody, and welcome back to Toasted, the podcast. I was telling Margie pre-show that this is actually the second time I recorded today. The first time I recorded was at 5 a.m. I was trying to get a Toasted Tuesday episode together. Margie was out of town and unavailable to record this morning, so I thought I would just do one alone. And it turns out that my stupid jokes are much stupider when I am the one who's also laughing at them. So that was not great. But worse yet was the fact that I recorded it and then got this message that something interface wasn't right. And so I tried to fix it. And in fixing it, lost everything. So we did, however, recover. We submitted we posted our first blog of 2023. So we're starting Toasted Tuesdays with a blog this week, and I wrote a little bit about intentions and crafting intentions and how that's been kind of an important aspect of my practice for the last 3 years. So you can check that out on our website, toastedthepodcast.com. Actually, I think it's just toastedpodcast.com.
Yeah.
And so enjoy that. Margie is fresh off a East Coast tour. She's been masquerading and no, I'm just kidding. But Margie, it's 2023. We've made it to 2023.
Yes.
And you
We did. Happy New Year, Nick.
You made some comment about Mercury is in retrograde. Is that true?
Yes. I think that's why you lost your recording this morning. Yes, Mercury is in retrograde. Went into retrograde on Friday, and Mercury in retrograde is all about communication and technology, and it's when the things that just don't make sense happen. Like you recorded this podcast and you lost it. Like that's craziness. That doesn't happen. And it's when emails and text messages and miscommunication and, misinterpretations. And it's like, why, like, what is this? And, they say that you should never sign contracts and stuff during Mercury in retrograde unless the deal was forged prior to Mercury going into retrograde. And it's just a matter of the signing of the paper, but actually constructing some kind of a contract or agreement or major bill of sale, like a house or something. They said, no, wait till Mercury's out of retrograde because if that deal happens during the retrograde and you sign it, more than likely when the retrograde's over, you'll notice something in the fine print or wait, I didn't realize that was a part of it. Hold on a second. So always avoid. So I'm not surprised. Today, the weirdest thing happened with my phone. This has never happened. Has this ever happened to you? I'm telling you, Mercury in retrograde. I went to do a text message. Now, the person's name that I intended to text was there. Their picture was there. I do the text. I hit send on the text. It's still that person. And the text pops up with somebody else's name and contact picture. Like it went to a totally different person. I'm like, what is this? And so, of course, I tried to bring it, delete it real quick, but forget it. The person already saw. And, it wasn't like it was some major, revealed some horrible secret or something, but it was just that kind of thing where I'm like, that wasn't for you, and the person called and he's like, hey, what's up? And I was like, oh, well, I don't know, Mercury in retrograde, that obviously the text wasn't for you, and sent it. I'm like, have you ever had that happen where you it just somebody else completely pops up? Have you ever had that happen?
I have.
I haven't ever.
What I always think is interesting is how do you play it from there though, from that point, right?
What do you mean?
Do you play it off like, oh, hey, I've been thinking about you, whatever, I mean, it depends on the context of the text, or do you just say hey, that wasn't for you? Sometimes it's weird, well,
because it wasn't it for the person who received this text, this cryptic message that I'm saying right now, it was, I was, he called right away and he was like, hey, he's like, well, he texted me, you busy? I see. And I'm like, that wasn't for you. He texted back, I know it wasn't. And so he's like, I'm going to call you. And I'm like, oh, Lord Almighty, that did not mean to open up this whole can of worms. But
you misread this.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm so sorry. That wasn't for you, at all. And it has to do with, XYZ. And he's like, oh, I know. And he's like, hey, how have you been? And it was a lovely conversation, but it was also the kind of thing where I'm like, I'm at work, I shouldn't be talking. But I'm like Mercury in retrograde. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like some horrible thing, but it was just one of those like, and that's really what Mercury in retrograde is. It's just like these bizarre things, or people misinterpret text, or like I said, weird technology things. So
was Mercury
in retrograde till near the end of the month.
Mercury was the messenger. Yeah. So that makes sense.
Communication.
Yep. Well,
there's a lot of funky stuff going on right now.
Now, do people really not sign contracts because of that? Or is that just something people
say?
I wouldn't. For real?
Well, yeah, I really wouldn't.
So you really I'm sorry, this is going to sound terrible, and I'm not trying to be funny.
I'm glad you did a little pause on yourself there. I am very proud of you for that. I was like, oh, careful.
But this is like, you take it so seriously that you actually allow it to. I don't mean this to sound condescending, and I know it does, but so like it changes the way that you act, like you live your life by this.
Well, I take it into consideration. You take in just like you would any other factors that you would have. So if you know that you're, not feeling your best and you're depleted, you shouldn't go work out. Like, you would take that into consideration. So it's information you take into consideration. And so, knowing that, like I said, if the deal was struck or the whatever it was, and you're just waiting for the papers to come to sign, I would do that. But if we were coming to some kind of major agreement or whatever during the retrograde period, I would just pause and say, and it's not a long period ever. I mean, they're very quick. It isn't, like some of the other ones. And I would just be like, you know what, can we just hold off until January 20th? Because Mercury comes out of retrograde on the 18th. And I just want to be able to look at it with fresh eyes until at that point, so it isn't like it's just information I take into consideration.
Okay. That's fair. I mean, we were talking about this, but this is, aside from Mercury in retrograde, like, this is a tough time of year, I think, for a lot of people, myself included, if I'm thinking about it now, because you come off of like the pinnacle of the year, and you get, like, I mean, not the pinnacle, but it's, I don't know, it's a tough time of year because you're coming off of Christmas, and then I don't know, what do you do now? It's the new year, Yeah,
I mean, and I think some of it has to do with the seasons of your life and everything too. It's weird not having, the whole kid family, this, that, the other. And, and even though I've had a few years to get used to it, the last few years have been a pretty crazy roller coaster ride. And so I don't know if it's because it suddenly isn't a crazy roller coaster ride. And that time you're kind of like, oh, I'm not either hanging on for dear life or trying to figure it out, or some major pivot or life quake has happened, because it happened in such succession for, and then when you throw COVID in, that was a life quake for everybody, all of us.
Right.
So when you sit there and go like, oh my goodness, like it's been nutty for a few years in a row, that for this year not to be nutty is just sort of like, I almost don't know what to do with the calm. Like, it almost is making me a little anxious because there's calm. And it was like an upside down holiday for me. We had the bizarre Buffalo storms and weather. And so, while everybody was busy, and I'm happy for everybody busy, with their different family and friend obligations and this, that, the other, I was twiddling my thumbs in Fredonia, and I couldn't get out to do anything because there was a travel ban. You couldn't travel. So we had shout out to, we were talking about this before the show, but shout out to Verona in Canandaigua, New York. They had a very, very fun masquerade party. And I was all excited to go the Friday, the 24th, to go up shopping near Bill's Stadium in Blaisdell area. Has like Joanne Fabrics and Michael's and some thrift stores and this, that, the other. And I wanted to get costume pieces, but the weather, you couldn't do it. And then it was, the Saturday, Sunday. So Christmas Eve day rather. And then Christmas itself. And then Monday, Tuesday. And it was all travel ban, all storms. You couldn't travel anywhere. So I thought, I'll occupy myself, doing a DIY masquerade costume. I was all excited, but instead I was like, I couldn't get to the store, didn't have any craft supplies. I'm like, time's ticking. I got to get to, make this thing. And it was just kind of like, wow. So it was just kind of a weird, wonky,
Yeah.
space. And then, but then it was a very, very fun weekend. Huge congrats to my partner in crime, Kelly Coons, for winning the mask contest and creating the most beautiful original creation. She is an artist. She's also an art teacher at Canandaigua Academy, and but she made the most beautiful headpiece and mask, and her costume was exquisite, and so it was exciting.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun.
It was a very, very fun way to, say goodbye to 2022. And I don't mean that in any kind of disdain, but just like to, farewell to 2022 and hello to 2023. And Kelly had really fun. She had gotten us these two, like, you kind of twist them open, like these handheld, like confetti popper cannon type things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And so when the countdown from, there was a DJ and everybody was yelling, the countdown from 10 and this, that, the other, she's like, come on, we got on either side of the DJ and like popped them. And so all this confetti went everywhere. And so it was just kind of a fun, way to just have celebrate, and that's what it was. It was just a fun, playful, celebratory night. So it was a nice way to, like I said, bid farewell to 2022, thanking it for the gifts it brought and lessons and the things that weren't so wonderful. Time to let it go, and then usher in 2023 with all sorts of optimism.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's here. What choice do you have but to be optimistic at this point? So, what are you? Are you an intention writer or no? Like, do you write your intentions every year?
I used to. I was kind of into that one word thing for a while, where pick one word as your theme word for the year. I really liked that because when you can only choose one, you really have to be thoughtful about what you want it to be and do that. I really didn't. I don't know. I didn't really set big intentions, and I just, I left Canandaigua this morning at 5:45, so I wasn't even home to journal. My typical, kind of New Year's Eve, New Year's Day type of thing. So I really haven't thought about. I've given it a little bit of thought, but I don't know. I haven't really settled on it. What about you? Are you an intention writer, a one word guy?
So,
what do you do?
No, I'm an intention writer, and that's what I wrote the blog post about today. Was just I really feel like writing intentions helps me to achieve them. So I think it's two. I think it's a couple things. One is like if I write it down, I'm much more likely to do it. That's just one of those truths, like I need to make my bed every day. I'm that guy. The rest of my house might be a mess, but I make my bed.
Yeah. Research shows that if you make your bed in the morning when you get up, that you are more productive throughout the day.
Yeah, I mean,
and I would agree with that.
It seems to work for me. And so intentions are the same thing.
Yep,
like
me too.
And I think the reason they work so well is because they keep me focused, and I hang them someplace conspicuous where I can see them and really focus on them. I also tend to write my intentions around like behavioral traits that I know are important to me. Like I'm trying to think of one.
Such as?
Yeah, so like creativity is a big part of my personality, and every personality test I've ever taken has confirmed that. So I always have like one of my intentions is to play guitar for, I don't think I said a set period of time. I think I said play guitar 3 times a week, because although it's really important to me, I also am pragmatic, and playing guitar is the easiest thing for me to not do. But I did play tonight, actually. So like, if I have to just like really keep it in front of me, and and then I do it. But if I were to do,
so do you have a set?
Yeah.
Let's say, do you have a set number? Like, do you like, is it like 3, 5, or just whatever feels right for this time period?
Yeah. So I just do whatever feels right. I try to do between 5 and 10. This year it happened to be 7.
Wow.
And that's where I stopped. Like, I suppose there's some numerology we could do there, but
number of perfection.
Yes. Anyway, but yeah, but I found that if I write, so like one year I did write an intention around like getting more organized, and that actually wasn't helpful to me because I'm
It's too
not like
broad.
yeah, it's too broad. An organization, um, I've found for myself anyway that organization sort of falls into place when the other conditions are met. So I'm more organized when everything else is happening. So like I'm
Hmm.
being creative, I'm innovating, because then I have to stay organized, right? But if I just say like
Interesting.
I'm going to get my life organized, like that's never going to happen because that's not a vital part of my personality. If that makes sense.
Doesn't fuel you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so I'm much more inclined to do things that are already part of my personality. So I try and build on those, um, which is
Well, that
not.
kind of goes back to when we talked about the book Better Than Before. It's your tendency. So if you're working
Yeah,
within your tendencies, so that's you're discovering what it is your tendencies are just via that, like realizing that I don't meet it, even though I want to be organized and I set it as an intention to be organized. My tendency is such that it is a byproduct of doing the things that fuel me, things that touch my spirit.
yeah. Well, and this particular batch of intentions have a lot of security based intentions in them. So I have some on like
What do
saving.
you mean?
Yeah, so like financial security and like saving some money
Oh, okay.
for like a house purchase and saving some money for um, uh, just general, you know, goals. Without.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just think like that's an important part of me too is like that sense of security and um, so I try and like have those intentions in place too, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Definitely.
And savings is also not
Yeah. No.
something that it's not something that like I would not say that's a strong suit of my parents, right? It's not something that like I saw my parents saving a lot of money. I mean, to be fair, they
Mm-hmm.
had 6 kids, and there wasn't a lot of extra money, um, so it was kind of like they were scrappy, and I learned how to be scrappy,
Mm-hmm.
and you learn how to like work hard.
But learning how to be scrappy is what you do to get through the times that are tight and tough versus a lifestyle. And that's, and that's not a criticism whatsoever. I mean, my mom had to be, creative and scrappy and robbing Peter to pay Paul because there
Yeah,
just was not the income. There just wasn't. So I totally understand that. But if you have the ability to get out of that and to be more intentional so that you're scrappy as a fail safe to get you through times that are lean versus that is the way that you do finances. Yeah, that's why I have to get organized. So I do have to say, um, after our last podcast, Steve Scouten, our super guest, he texted me and he was like, I've got our next, I listened to the podcast and, I figured out our next adventure and I got all excited and I'm like, yay, what's it going to be? He's like, I'm going to come down with my laptop and we're going to sit there. I have a whole spreadsheet thing and I'm going to help you budget. I was like, oh God, that is like not an adventure. It might be an adventure for you, but this is horrible. So he's such a good friend. So yeah, so he's gonna make sure I hit that intention this, early into this year. So
good.
so thank you, Steve. I'm grateful for the outcome.
Yeah.
Not the process, but the outcome.
Well, and you may find though too that budgeting's not that bad. Like it helps you.
Well, now that you shared that whole money trauma thing, I'm gonna look that up and really give that a read and see if I can. I think that's what I need to do to
Yeah.
feel
So
emotionally secure before going into this.
listen, I'm gonna put this in the show notes because the weirdest thing happened when I left that conversation. I turned on my favorite financial podcast. I've talked about this before. Is So Money, and I have to look it up now. She had a guest on whose name was Vee Weir, who has her own podcast, but she talked a lot about money trauma, and I'll be darned if I can find it on the
Oh.
fly here. It was so funny, and it was really great to listen to her talk.
Mm-hmm.
And she also, what was kind of interesting was, whoops, I accidentally played it. um,
Yeah.
but she talked a lot about like the shame that we feel around
Yes.
money.
Tremendous shame. Oh, huge shame. Absolutely.
But that's also not great either, right? So like recognizing that, so recognizing it as part of it, but then I got to stop looking for it. But I really want to share. I'll put it in the show notes. I promise, the episode. And but you know, she's like, I got obsessive, like to the point where she wouldn't spend money, and she'd talk about was money with her friends, and her friends, you know, were like, dude, you got to like chill out, you know, no one wants to hang out with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not good either, right? Like, so there's,
Right.
like all things, there's that balance. But I think so one, I think what I like about budgeting is it helps you stop being afraid of your money.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of. Actually, December is always one of those months where I'm like, I don't know if I'm not afraid of money anymore. I think I might be more afraid of money, but that's just December. So, yeah, I don't know. I think it's a really interesting, I think it's a fascinating concept, budgeting and money management in general, just because people are so moved by it in positive and negative ways, you know, and I just think I would prefer to have a healthy relationship with it. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well, like I've said last time, it was your text that was, a very kind text that was like, well, you were a little bit cheeky in it, but like, well, can I ask you something? Do you like being stressed out by this? Of course I don't like being stressed out by it.
Right.
And it's like, well, then there you go. And it was like, and I don't. So got to do something about it. Just like anything else. If you want it to change, guess what? Saddle up, because you got to be the one doing the changing. So, yep. So
But
that's, I already said that was one of my things,
yeah.
but health is the other one. So definitely looking to tackle some things in that vein that, um, you know, uh, it's very, and we shared this last time in the last episode, that is just for me is frustrating, is the lack of holistic healthcare that is covered by insurance. I just think
Mm-hmm.
that that's criminal. And I'm very outspoken and soapboxy and firebrand when it comes to that, but I think it's terrible. And I have a lot of very strong viewpoints about the US FDA and the fluoride in our water and chemicals and foods and all those sorts of things. And so that's very frustrating to me. And so um I've been doing a lot of research on my own, and I'm not a doctor by that kind of a doctor. I'm not a medical
Right.
doctor. And so I'm very very grateful to my very good friend Dr. Bonnie Cronin, who is a naturopathic doctor. And so I'm very pleased with her guidance and try and take some things and cross reference and whatever. But it's so really digging into some holistic sources and dedicating and committing, so the intention would be committing to some of these protocols that have to do with autoimmune. I mean, I have an autoimmune disease, and it's the type of thing where it's never going to quote unquote um, necessarily reverse itself or be 100% healthy, but there are things I can be doing. And so just learning and really kind of focusing on that, because you want to feel good. And I, like you were saying, with the creativity and all those other things that help you with that global goal of organization. Well, for me, I know that, to tackle some of the organization or other things that I want to do in my life, I have to feel good. I physically need to feel good, and not physically feeling good it's draining. And I notice the effects of that with the lack of organization or the lack of creativity or other aspects of life. So I'm like, nope, committing to that. And I've been reading a really great book and figuring that kind of thing out. So those are my two big intentions for the year. So I think I kind of set them without realizing I set them. My commitments.
Yeah, it sounds like you do. And I think whatever you call them doesn't really matter. Although, as a quick aside, how about that movie, The Commitments? Is that not one of the best movies of all time? You know that movie?
I've not seen that.
What? No. Okay.
I don't know.
What year was that out? Assignment
not
is
a
to
season,
watch,
but what year?
year. I'm gonna guess 85 to 88.
What?
It's old. The Commitments.
The Commitment?
No, The Commitments. It's about an Irish soul band. That's all I'm gonna say.
Oh, I definitely have never heard of this.
So good.
Okay.
It's just
is that the name
really
of their band?
Wonderful. What's that?
I said, is that the name of their band?
Yeah. Commitments? Yeah. They end up starting a band, and it's called
1991. I'm looking it up on Google right now. Okay.
Is it 91?
I'm looking up on Google right now. 1991.
Wow. Okay. I thought it was earlier than that. But yeah, great movie.
Right. Yeah. Well, awesome.
I also managed to find that episode that I was talking about. So it's episode 1451, Overcoming Financial Guilt and Shame. With Vee Weir, founder of Vee Frugal Fox. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, I actually...
But we talk about, the whole point of the podcast is about failure and turning your failure into a superpower. And so, feeling that sense of shame or dread or fear or any of those things, like ultimately you feel like a failure because you have all those boggy down blah feelings that go along with it. That does not feel like a superpower. So it feels like a failure to be like afraid of money or not having a budget or not liking spreadsheets and all of that. And it's the same thing, and it sounds ridiculous, but there's a bizarre sense of failure when it comes to, your health. You feel like, well, I must just be lazy, or I must this, or I whatever, or, you fill in the blank. And it's like, no, like, okay, you can do things. And like you said, like taking a pragmatic approach to it. It's like that whole New Year's resolution, all or nothing, I think only sets us up for failure and feeling bad about ourselves. But taking it as an intention or a commitment and doing it in a thoughtful, like building way, kind of like, what is it? 10%, the whole meditation app, just doing it for a minute a day, and at the end of a week, you can say, I meditated every single day for a minute. And that's more than I did the day before, week before, and now let's up it to 2 minutes, or let's do this. And, in the concept of 1%, if you just do something 1%, well, every single day that all adds up. It's like compounding interest, but you're investing in yourself. Yeah. And so I think that at the end of, so when we have this podcast and we're welcoming in 2024, we can say, like, all right, you played your guitar 3 times a week, and some weeks it was 5 times a week, and some weeks it may have been twice a week, but you still averaged out with more than you were doing before, and you fed your soul with that, and so I think that that's an exciting thing, because I think sometimes when we say superpower, it's not like, an overnight thing. It isn't like, like you go into the booth and come out, instead of Clark Kent, you're Superman. I think that the superpower is something that you have to not create. What's the word I'm looking for? Like, it's there, it's untapped maybe, or it's about changing your viewpoint on it, the perspective,
right?
And realizing that, taking this and saying like, no, I'm not gonna allow this to be the millstone around my neck. I'm going to turn this around, and turn this into something great.
It reminds me a little bit of like The Truman Show, right? So have you seen that movie? Jim Carrey?
No.
Okay.
I know. I was raising children and working full time.
Okay. So general premise,
I didn't watch a lot of movies.
This guy lives his life, right? And he lives in this sort of like pristine
TV show,
world.
Right?
And it's a TV show, but everyone knows it but him. And eventually,
that's horrible.
It is horrible. And eventually he starts to like get wise to it and ultimately figures it out. No spoiler alert there, probably, but also this movie is 20 years old, so I guess if it's a spoiler alert, that's okay at this point. Um, but it's a little bit like so that moment, right, where you discover there's something going on, right? So there's a moment. So the moment of failure is also this moment where you have a choice. You can wallow in it. You can feel sorry for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and actually, to some extent, you should, to acknowledge those
You
feelings
have to.
too.
You
Right.
yeah, you have to. It's not.
But
Yeah.
if you never progress from there, if you never
Mm-hmm. You
harness
stay
it,
stuck.
right? If you stay
Mm-hmm.
stuck, like that's where I think we are doing a disservice, a little bit. So I'm thinking about our upcoming speaking engagements a lot, and so in particular, I'm thinking about like how we talk about failure with kids, right? Like failure is
Mm-hmm.
something and if you were to, you know, have this discussion, like, uh, I'd be curious, like, it seems to me most people would say failure is something you should avoid. But that's exactly the
Right.
wrong
Versus
message,
right.
right?
Because then you're not
So
risking. You're not trying. You're not risking. You're not innovating, and nothing.
you're not learning, right? Because you learn when
No,
you
you're not,
fail.
because exactly. And I think the biggest thing is removing the word failure. If you take the word failure away and use iteration. So what's your first iteration? What's your first attempt? Not even draft. I always hated that. But what's that first iteration? What
Hmm.
does this beginning of it look like? And now when you've refined it a little bit, what does it look like now? And like, how exciting is that? And when, we think about, the iterative models in general, but when you think about like people who create art, not that I do, but like visual artists, they add layers of paint, the next layer of paint, and they aren't like feeling like they failed because they're not done yet. They're doing part of it and assessing and then going back to it, or the scientific method. The whole point is like, did all of these things lead to what I thought it would? No. Oh man. Okay. Let's go back and tweak one thing, one variable, and see and do that, repeat it. And it's that iterative process. But yet in other things, it's this concrete, okay, first time out of the gate, oh, you didn't do it, you failed. And it's like, wait a
Right.
second, that is exactly in opposition to these other theories and other ways that we teach things. When a baby's learning to walk, they fall down and over and over and over, but that's because it's what you need to do in the process of learning to walk. And we somehow lose that. And I don't know how or where or when, but we do. Like you said, that whole failure piece of it is such a final, there's nowhere to go from there feeling. And with kids in school, that's certain kiddo, the resilience. That's what I love too, the research in resilience and all the different neurosciences now and education and all of
Right.
that. But they've not really been able to pinpoint what is it that makes somebody resilient and another person not resilient. Like, what are those things? And they really have not been able to crack that one yet. You can have kids from the same socioeconomic or others, fill in the blank with all the possible variables there can be. And some seem to have this ability to be resilient, and others don't. So for the kiddos that aren't as resilient or aren't resilient, that first failure, or what for them is perceived as that finality feeling of a failure, of a you are a failure, not this paper was or this test, but that's translated to a you.
Right.
They're done at school. They've just been damned at a very young age to see themselves as, I am not successful in school. And that is criminal. That's just terrible. So
Well,
teaching this
even
concept of
yeah.
failing is just a byproduct of trying and risking and innovating. It's a piece of the process. I think it's critical.
Well, and I 100% obviously agree, but I think it should be like not. I mean, I think it should be central to curriculum development because I
Mm-hmm,
think it
absolutely.
it opens the doors to so many discussions about. And if you take that lens, right, if you look at history through that lens, like you expose a lot of things, like like maybe Christopher Columbus wasn't like the best guy in the world, or
Yeah.
and all this, we stop living the fantasy and start
Mm-hmm.
having real honest discussions, right, about like
Mm-hmm.
what is it
Yes.
that we're doing um, in living this life. And like part of it, like there's a lot of good things that come out of those discussions too. So I'm not also saying that we need to take all of our, folk heroes and villainize them. That's not it either. But it's to have
No.
like a more nuanced discussion around these things. And I
Well,
think,
to take more of a historiography approach where you take the event in history and then you share that event from multiple perspectives, multiple different perspectives. So what was, this, event like from the aspect of, whatever the indigenous people are of that particular, let's say, country, and then what is it from the perspective of a foot soldier, then the perspective of a general, then the perspective of the king or queen back wherever, then the perspective of the, you can go through a million different examples, but
yeah,
all of that together, you're still talking about the one event, but from a multiple set of perspectives. And then you say, okay, well, so then what was this thing? And it's not taken from that, mono perspective or any one particular culture or one particular,
yeah,
agreed upon perspective. And I think that is important to open up the eyes of any student anywhere in the world, because we only know the life and the culture we're in. So seeing it from all those perspectives is huge. And then you can bring in the concept of failure into that. Like, okay, so this initiative or this campaign, I always use history because that was my major in college, but, or even if it's a story and you're talking about the characters in the story, and you can bring in those things, and like you said, having those conversations about failure and bringing failure into it. I mean, that's really what the focus of our talk will be in EduCon.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, to kind of apply this in like mathematics is equally important. So, you know, if a student is, and I know this isn't strictly speaking an education podcast, but I think it's also interesting to think about like what happens if a student messes up on a problem. So,
Mm-hmm.
so we tell them it's okay to mess up, but then we mark them off. We take the points off,
Right.
right?
But
And
take
so
points
like,
off.
so
Yeah.
now that's fine because I understand why we do it, and you have, I don't think everybody gets gold stars and whatever. That's not it either. But where is the feedback to the student on that? So like, why did you lose the
Mm-hmm.
points? The
Mm-hmm.
points aren't because you made a mistake, right? The point, you didn't lose
Right.
points
And
because you made a mistake.
that's often where it ends.
You
Mm-hmm. Right.
right,
And that's huge. The difference, that's it right there. That is everything. It's not because you, the person, made a mistake, because that then feels that sense of I am a failure,
right,
versus this is a misstep in the process of solving this equation.
right. And so on the flip side, what is interesting to me, and I think, and I make this statement as someone who's done it, who's been on the other side of it too, and I've made 1,000 mistakes. I'm realizing the longer I teach, the more I realize I don't know.
Oh.
But when we get college students who come in and they get their first paper reviewed, and they're like, "Wait, what do you mean I got a C plus?" It's like, well, here's all the reasons. These are all the things. And again, this doesn't mean that you're not a good writer or that you are a good writer. This means these are the areas that you need to work on. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
really hard discussion the first time around with a student, right? But I also
Mm-hmm.
think part of it is because we are so afraid of failure in schools. I mean, just so afraid of
Oh,
the
huge.
word. You
Mm-hmm.
almost can't say it, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a crying shame. And I don't think, again, when I say failure, I don't necessarily mean the numerical value attached to passing or failing. I don't care about that. But like, we're not having nuanced discussions about historical failure or historical, there's the wars, who won and who lost, right? Instead of thinking about it in a more
Mm-hmm.
nuanced approach. And I think this really became clear to me my college professor was a Vietnam War veteran. He wrote a book about Vietnam War, and I remember there was one section in the book where he was talking about because he was living in Vietnam at the time, teaching English, and they referred to the American War of Aggression. And he was like, "You mean the Vietnam War?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's what you call it. We call it the American War of
Mm-hmm.
Aggression." Right? So like when you think
Mm-hmm.
about like that's a much
Yes.
different, a much
Yeah,
different.
that's historiography, telling it
Yeah.
from the multiple perspectives. What was that like from the American soldier's perspective? What was it like from the American back home watching it on TV? What was
Yeah.
that like for the Vietnam, government? What was it like for the Vietnamese people? Like, absolutely, it's the same event, but it's called different things. The perspective, the reasons, the motives. Like, yeah, that's huge.
But that is the superpower, right? When you start to have to kind of bring us back here a little bit, like
Mm-hmm.
when you start to have those nuanced discussion, when you start to be, Truman in the Truman Show, and you realize, the world might not look exactly the way you thought it was going to look, like that's
Mm-hmm.
the moment where the superpower kicks in, because once you know it, you can do something about it, right?
Right, and it's the being able to do something about it. That's the superpower. So I think sometimes, I don't know as though we've ever really truly defined or explained what our thinking is behind using that word superpower. It doesn't mean suddenly everything is okay. It doesn't mean everything is, magically better and all your decisions are perfect and it's
Right.
happily ever after. Like, that's not the superpower, at least in what we've talked about, probably not on the show, which is
Right.
probably a bit of a failure on our part. But it's that removing that millstone. It's the freedom to take action. It's realizing that, wait, I still have a voice in this. I still have, there are, like you said, actions I can take. I am not being run over by this, or it's not in charge of me. I'm going to turn that to be in charge of me. The shame feeling, failure feeling, fear feeling, that no longer gets to be the controlling. It's the freedom and realizing of actions that you can take is the superpower. Doesn't magically mean everything is all better. I mean, for me, taking action, dealing with this autoimmune situation, that's action, and that feels good to do something about it, something with intelligence and research behind it and all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And that gives you energy and it's excitement. It raises your vibration, and you start cycling up instead of cycling down. And I think that is the superpower right there. And that can translate into, you setting your intentions for the year and making sure you're sticking to them, and then bring it right back to what we're talking about with education, like having a new way of looking at curriculum, a new way of implementing these ideas. Like, that's where the teacher now feels empowered, to that you're not a slave to these standards and tests and the schedule and the myriad of things on everybody's plates. It's like, hold on a second, like, I still have a voice in this, and that is where the superpower is found.
Yeah. Well, and I just think too, there's, in all of my discussions in schools, I think there's such an emphasis on, uh, you know, we don't have time to teach social emotional learning because we have all this curriculum to do. And I'm like, this is a great moment to fuse those
Mm-hmm.
two things together, right? Where you can actually do a lot of like decision making analysis with students, like, so, was this the right decision? This character did this thing in a story. Was this the right decision? Well, how do we actually break that down? What do you think their thought process was? Now you're actually talking about decision making with students, not just
Right.
literature, right? So now you're
Right.
to use an idiom, killing two birds with one stone. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's the way we just have to get. We have to get outside of our current thinking around failure if we're going to make any progress in any direction. And I'm increasingly convinced that it's kind of like where all of these things come together, in schools anyway. And I think in workplaces too. So like Sean Nelms
Mm-hmm.
talked about continuous improvement. And I think any organization seeks to continuously improve. So one of the things, on the podcast we talk about is the number of downloads that we get, and like how do we improve that. And so we try things, and some things work and some things don't, but we're always
Mm-hmm.
kind of thinking about that. So even in this podcasting business, that's a reality. And
It is
I think that business is much better at this than schools, because
for a lot of
there's
reasons.
there's no kids involved, right? And there that
Well,
and
there's no kids. There's oftentimes not contracts and unions, and they work 12 months, not 10. And there aren't, the I mean, obviously they have regulatory things that they have to follow, but as
right,
far as like, mandates by the state that are non-funded but
right,
mandated, and, all these different types of things, it's a completely different animal. But I read an interesting article the other day and shared it with the admin team in my district about de-implementation,
yeah,
and the idea of, one of the things I think that we do to ourselves in the education business is we add, and we never take anything away. And so that's impossible. It's just, you just can't keep adding, and you have to take things away. But, teachers, and I speak as a teacher, we become very territorial, but I've done this project for 15 years, or, but I always do this in the month of November, and it's like, well, is this still serving our purpose? We have to let some things go, and that can become, excuse me, that can become, some hard lines in the sand that people draw, and so it's the idea of de-implementing, and how do you as an organization decide what to de-implement? What is the litmus test to say, this is no longer getting us the gains or the outcomes, or this is a practice that, while it was good in its heyday, is no longer the case. This isn't the world our students were preparing them for. So what do we take away so that we can spend more focused times on the things that will
yeah.
bring us to innovation?
But if you unpack that frame of mind, that, oh, I've done this for 15 years, I want to keep
Mm-hmm.
doing it this way. If you really unpack that, what's at the heart of it?
Oh, fear of change.
Fear of failure, right? Like, I know this works. I even know sometimes the answer is like, I know
Well,
this
I
works.
know, I don't know if I know it works. I know I'm comfortable at it. I
Well,
know I feel in
and that's what I was
control
going to
of
say.
this.
Like,
I don't even know if it works.
I know how this process goes. I understand this process. You can fill it
Mm-hmm.
in with
It's
any,
my comfort zone.
right.
It's my comfort zone.
What is not known is if I try something new, it might fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like,
And then I have kids that, it's going to be parents wondering why I did this. It could be on, and there's a lot of fear of the repercussions that come with that, and we still have this sense of the teachers are supposed to be the know all in this craft. They're supposed to be this expert, and that's an unfair and unrealistic expectation. They are not, the oracle. That's not what a teacher is.
yeah, but I think really good teachers know that they aren't that, right? They
Mm-hmm.
know that they're not that oracle. They
But there's a pressure there's a perceived
Oh,
pressure, that I think
100%.
has gotten a lot better over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
But when it was always this, that the teacher know that, like, you were some kind of encyclopedia, with a human body around it, rather,
Yeah.
and that's just not the case. And the first time that, no matter how many times you check over your newsletter, a bazillion times, inevitably there's going to be a typo somewhere,
Yeah.
and you can have somebody else look at it, whatever. And then it's just becomes, I mean, I've seen things. I've never been a victim of this, thank goodness, but like on Facebook. But I mean, I've had nasty emails like, as I cannot believe that as the teacher, you would send out a newsletter with this word misspelled. It's like, oh my God. I can see if this was, well, I guess I can't see being that nasty about something, but it's just the type of thing where you're like, I'm not infallible, like, I'm sorry, I was doing this on a Sunday at 7 o'clock at night. I was trying to, it's like, come on, give
But
me a break with this.
but notice how much of that, like, fear of failing
Mm-hmm.
is like driving all of these discussions, and
Huge,
I think
huge. It's sad.
we really have to get to a place where we can let some of that go, and I think intentionally build systems that invite people not only to like try new things, but also to like help them get over it. Because the other like reality is nobody's perfect, and if you keep pretending that you are, that's also going to backfire too, right? I mean,
Well, it's just tremendous pressure that you put on yourself, and it's a very unhappy place to be, but that goes into, many other things that we should definitely explore in other podcasts and hopefully with experts and guests. But that's, psychological safety, the workplace safety, the culture that you're in. I mean,
yeah,
all of those things are the factors. I mean, when you talk about, the old like Maslow before Bloom, and I'm a big believer in that. If you don't have those very basic human needs met, and safety is one of them, then that's not the culture, the impetus to allow for innovation and risk. It just isn't.
right. Yeah, there's so much to say here, but um, I agree with you 100%. Like, I think we've got to get a more nuanced discussion um, around success, the dialogue around success and failure in schools. I think
Mm-hmm.
we have to stop praising grades as a predictor of success. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just silly. I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'll just say it. It's
Yes.
silly. You
Well,
know,
it's, and we know, and we've said it before, it's just, being able to do school, being able is very different, than 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 having the skills, the resiliency, the grit, the whatever it is to be successful in life. We all know many, many students who can do very well. They graduate high school and then they just flounder. They're not able to produce in the college environment or the work environment, or, and that sometimes can cripple people as long as they stay a slave to that idea of like, I was successful here, I am a failure here. And
right?
it's like, no, and so there's just a lot. This is like, we could unpack this and plan out multiple podcasts with it. But going back to the idea of intentions for the year, really, it's, I think the biggest intention is almost finding a way to shield yourself from a label of failure, to say, what are other words I could use, or what is other, this is not, this finality, this death sentence is not what this is. This doesn't feel good. I don't like it. I
Right.
don't like the way this turned out, but it doesn't mean that it's a mark of who I am as a human being, as a failure. And I'm talking
Mm.
like I've got, I can, that I don't do this to myself on a daily basis.
No,
So
and
I'm right in there with, this is what I have to work on in 2023.
right. We all
I'm a
do,
failure at not feeling like a failure.
but the system is, all the systems are kind of designed to make you think that way, right? Like, and I
Mm-hmm.
mean, nobody's immune to it. That's not,
No,
ignoring
gosh,
it is
no.
not an option either. That's why we
Mm-hmm.
need a more nuanced discussion around it, because the reality is
Mm-hmm.
we spend most of our life failing. Well,
Mm-hmm.
like experiencing failures, or at least at various points and often in our lives we fail, right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, when I think
We
about
don't
just,
have the outcome that we were going for.
yeah, right. And I
That's
think,
all it is. We don't have the outcome we were going for.
right. I mean, I had like, 100 failures before 6:30 this morning, just trying to get the podcast up and running. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that's, we've really kind of gone back to sort of the heart and soul of why we do this podcast, and maybe that's fitting for the first podcast to be aired
Yeah, maybe
in
it is. What is the
2023.
intention of the podcast?
Yeah, and
Definitely.
I
Because
certainly,
we're in this together.
and I want to say something about this as well, because in talking to a couple of people this weekend, and I think you had mentioned this to me too, people have, one of the comments people have made about the show is like, oh, it sounds like your guests have everything figured out, and are you ever, the question to me specifically was, are you ever going to have anybody who's in the middle of a failure? And my
Mm-hmm.
response was like, I hear you, and I would love to have a guest on the show who's in the middle of that, but I can't very well invite somebody onto the show to talk about their experiences because that could be it could be illegal, right? In some cases, you can't talk about things that are going
In some
on.
cases, you can't talk about things, certainly.
And in other cases, it's just humiliating, and so
It's too raw.
right. So that's
But it isn't that everybody has it figured out. They may have come through something, a specific something, but doesn't mean everything therefore is figured out. It means they
100%
came through a certain something,
right.
and that's what we hope. And I appreciate the feedback because it helps us in the messaging with this to make sure that we're maybe defining better, not showing like it's, people often talk about one aspect or a lesson they learned, through a specific situation, but it certainly isn't that we feel like we have it all figured out.
No, I think I have nothing
Far from
figured out. Actually,
Far from it. I think so too.
um,
I think the more open you become to learning and growing and removing that failure thought process of like, oh, that's it, it's over. When you open yourself up to experiencing life and experiencing it in that iterative mindset, then you're opening yourself up to so many more experiences, which just opens yourself up to so many more things that don't turn out the way you intended.
yeah.
And kind of definitely leads me to more of a like, oh, I thought I'd have this figured out by now, but I have other stuff figured out, and isn't that what living is? Curiosity, experiences, trying new things, challenging yourself to do new things. So I'm going to share this really quick. Kelly got me a really cool Christmas present. So she had done the salt float and up in Rochester, and where you go in these tanks and it's like all sensory things are basically off and there's the way the salt is in the water, like you just float, but it's completely pitch black and you're in this like closed tank thing. And when she and her friend Jen did this before, I was like literally having like suffocating feelings of claustrophobia with the idea of her going into this tank. Jen was in more of an open one, but Kelly was in this closed one. She sent me the videos ahead. I was like, text me like as soon as you're out. Like I was having trouble breathing knowing she was in there. It was crazy. I was so like, I have some claustrophobia issues, obviously. And so we talked about it. And so I was like, after her experience and all this kind of stuff, I'm like, you know what? This is one of the things I want to challenge myself to. And so she got me a gift certificate to do a closed tank salt float. And on the gift certificate, it was saying yes to things that scare you in 2023. And I was like,
cool.
oh my gosh. So yeah. So isn't that really neat? So that's going to be
would scare me,
one
by
of
the
the
way.
new experiences. Yeah, so I'm scared. I'm definitely scared. But it's like, all right, this sensory deprivation allows you to get to this place that you can just exist. And it's supposed to be like similar to being just like floating in space. So I'm, the buoyancy, because you just float. You don't have to do anything. You just exist. So I'm so curious about this. I don't know if I'll make it the whole time, if I'll press the panic button or whatever, but yeah, so it's it's the more you open yourself to these things, the more you open yourself to living and experiencing, the more you're opening yourself up to things not going the way you thought they would go. But I don't think that's a bad thing.
I don't know if I could float.
In fact, I think it's a really good thing.
I'm really struggling with the idea of floating in. I don't know if I could float in a tank of water with a lid on it.
I'll send you the videos too, because I was super, super panicked when she said, I was like, that sounds really neat. Then she's explaining about this closed tank thing. I'm like, wait, what? Whoa. Slow down. There's a tank and it's closed. And I was instantly like, I can't breathe. But so I'll send you the videos of it, but it's really cool. So I'm looking very forward to this. But I realized that, like a year ago, I'm not sure I could do even the open tank float, but now I'm like, all right, so that is the superpower. That's where it is right there, is saying like, okay, and it doesn't mean that if I never did the salt float, it doesn't mean that I failed. It just means that I took the time to explore what is it about this, and then find that, okay, there's got to be fear, there's got to be shame. What is this coming back to? What am I telling myself that I feel I need to achieve out of this? Is this achievement based? Why does it have to be achievement based? That's kind of the question I've been asking myself, thinking about careers and decisions and all that. And I'm like, why is there like a have to feeling? Why do you always, everything has to be achievement based? Because that's how we set ourselves up for feeling like we failed. Sometimes.
Well, and
oftentimes.
Not to dive back into this because we should probably wrap this up, but I think also that pressure to always succeed is irrationally ill-founded. I mean, it's just not possible. It's not healthy. It's not well researched. It's not, I mean, like there's it's so funny that this whole system of like, how do we keep people from failing? How do we, success. I mean, like that's not real life. I'm sorry.
Direct opposition.
That's not a real world. That's a Truman Show, and the best thing we can do is help people get out of it. So
I like it.
Hey, I want to shout out.
Analogy, Nick.
I want to give a shout out here. I'm drinking this tonight, this BrewDog hazy, non-alcoholic. It's called non-alcoholic hazy AF. And I got to tell you, if you're looking for an alternative to beer, wine right now, well, I don't know if this is an alternative to wine, but if you're a beer drinker, this is pretty darn good. And a buddy of mine turned me on to these, and I have to say I'm highly impressed. So give it a shot.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Are you doing dry January?
No, well, yeah, I guess. I don't know. I'm just generally trying to scale back and cut back and all sorts of ways. But actually they taste good. So to be honest with you,
that's a
part
plus.
of it is like, but anyway, and I also wanted to do, oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't
my
ask.
favorite
I'm sorry.
Bengal
I should have
spice,
asked.
Celestial Seasonings. Oh, well,
like
no,
Bengal
I'm just butting
spice.
right in. But yes, Celestial Seasonings, Bengal spice. It's my favorite. So yeah.
No, I didn't mean it like I didn't ask, not like a jerk face comment. I just mean like I didn't ask. I should have. Like I was whatever. I'm not going to try and explain it. That's a great tea though. I do love that one. So,
yeah.
Also, I just want to celebrate before we log off here the fact that Toasted Podcast is showing up on Google as like a top search, which means people out there are searching it. And so we're really happy. So thank you for all the support.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for sharing it with people and for our listeners and our Toasted family. We love the feedback we get and hearing from everyone. So that's huge. So thank you for the support. That's the greatest gift ever.
So, yeah, I mean, if you're a giant company and you want to finance a relatively small operation, let us know. We're open to taking bids for sponsors. So
our answer will be yes.
Yeah. Oh, you're a t-shirt company? Absolutely. So, all right.
We got it.
Anyway, on that note, Dr. Wright, how about a cheers?
Cheers. Sounds good to me. Let me get my tea mug. To 2023.
To 2023.
To optimism.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.
The side of this can says, embrace the opaque. So.
Oh, fun.
Weird, right? It's that Mercury in retrograde.
Mercury in retrograde.
Did I use it correctly there?
It has nothing to do with.
Okay.
No, not at all. Okay. But Mercury is in retrograde, so
all right.
That's okay. Communication, see?
All right. Well, we'll see you later.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.